So, glazing. It's so incredibly fun. I love it so much. It's my very favorite painting technique of all time because it really taught me how to sort of work with both transparent color and opaque. And when you have sort of mastered using both together, you'll be able to do so much more with color and so much more with also sort of like the way you layer things in your painting. So gloss medium is excellent for glazing. You can also, some artists will do what's called an isolation coat in between painting sessions, in which you might sort of, you might do a whole layer of gloss medium in between each session, which will eventually create this sort of beautiful prismatic effect in which you can really sort of see through each layer. And it'll create physical depth, but it'll also just sort of emphasize the sort of artificial depth that you're creating. So I'm gonna first just sort of glaze with lemon. So it's pretty bright. So I've really sort of I've added some texture to my lemon, but for the most part, it's just a couple of values. And so I'm gonna use, so this is Indian yellow, but this is Liquitex fluid acrylics, or sorry, soft body. So it's it flows a little bit more. And it doesn't have quite as tall of ridges in your paint strokes. But I recommend whenever you start glazing to first begin with a really thin layer. So, and it also wouldn't hurt to have like a wet rag close by in case you put something on and you hate it and you want to wipe it off. So I've got my brush nice and clean, and I've got some gloss medium here with my Indian yellow, and I'm just gonna mix it up to create what looks like sort of like, I don't know, what does that look like? So it's pretty thin. I can see the marks of my palette through it. And I can then take this and I can glaze right on top of my entire lemon without even shifting the value of it, without shifting the consistency, and it will sort of create this beautiful unifying color, while at the same time it will maintain all of the value that I worked hard to get. So all of the shadows and the light that's sort of reflecting through are all gonna be there as long as you use a transparent enough glaze. So every one of your colors should have either an open square on it. So this has an open square because it's super transparent. Your white will have a sort of filled in square. And this means it's opaque because white is like the most opaque of all colors. And if you add white to anything, it'll automatically make it more opaque. So you want to make sure that when you first start glazing that you glaze with transparent pigments, but then you can also make like a white glaze. There's totally things you can do with opaque tones with glazing. But for this purpose, I recommend making sure you're using a pretty transparent color. So even without the gloss medium, this color is so transparent that you can really see right through it, while at the same time it's adding quite a lot of color. And so then, for my apple, I feel like I should really use more cadmium red than I've got. But I do know that I need a bit of green in it. And I also need some green for those leaves. So I'm just gonna add a bit of blue to my Indian yellow glaze to create a green glaze. And then I can really just sort of pop it over top of the values that I've painted in. Does that make sense? So you can glaze really subtly. So maybe you want to just add some moments of glaze if you're already sort of happy and finished with your painting. But I really recommend at least trying it. And this is another reason why we are sort of exaggerating our light tones, because you'll notice that this lemon, which was bright white, it's now sort of more of like a light to mid-tone. So I might need to go through with some pure white and add some more bright highlights on top of it. So I really recommend using glazing as a way of sort of adding color to a monochromatic painting, but you can also use this while working on sort of like a a colorful painting in which you might want to sort of have one tone down that you're then painting on top of. So like, what does this blue look like when I glaze over it? Or this like pink, how does that sort of create a new tone? So this is also a technique that you can use in case you have a lot going on in your painting and you need to either unify something to push it back or to just unify the painting as a whole. So let's say this tone was pretty much the same as this tone. I felt like I needed something to subtly shift it. I could just glaze over my whole background and it would push it back. Even if I had like some objects back there that were in pretty high contrast, by glazing it over it, it would unify them, bring them slightly closer to each other in value and color, and it'll also that'll sort of send them back in space, because high contrast things tend to come forward, and because of atmospheric perspective, things that are slightly less contrasted and more unified will go further back in space. That is about it. You can also make like a really wildly colored portrait if you want, with like all the primaries working in full force. And it might look sort of like a clown party for a while, and you're like, whoa, I need to tone this down. And you can then sort of paint over the entire thing with one tone, and all of the colors beneath it will then make sense together because they have that one transparent tone on top in common. So you can really use glazing in so many ways. And we'll sort of get into some of those other applications later on. But first, just at least try it on some section of your painting. Keep a wet rag close by so you can wipe it off if it looks bad. But at the same time, you do need to be sort of careful, because if you paint one layer of glaze and then you don't let it dry all the way before doing a second layer, it can sort of pick up, it becomes sort of tacky like glue, and it'll sort of pick up your glaze in a way that will create a weird splotchiness. So whenever you do one layer, you want to sort of like give it a couple minutes before you do another. That sound good? Any questions? Cool. Go for it. I hope you love glazing as much as I do.
And also estimate set. So what is